Welcome back to PlanetInside Series 1, Episode 6. I'm your host, Luke Gagan. You were just listening to the very mysterious radio signal known as UVB-76. Although it sounds like a pre-recorded loop, the buzzer noise is actually generated manually. This explains why sometimes listeners randomly hear telephone conversations, banging noises, and strange voices. The speaker creating the buzzer is constantly placed next to the microphone, giving the world an eerie insight into whatever top secret place the signal originates from. The station was first recorded in 1982, although it is believed to have been around since the mid-1970s and has continuously produced a non-stop buzzing drone overlaid across everything else, which has earned the broadcast the nickname The Buzzer, and it is thought to be manually generated, although nobody knows why. Very rarely this buzzing transmission has been punctured by the sudden appearance of an almost ghostly Russian voice, which eerily recites numbers and names before fading away back to continue the beeps. The voice is believed to be stating some sort of code, although again, no one has any idea what it means. For the first time in a history that stretches back nearly 40 years, the mysterious Russian radio signal had issued an order. On January 24, 2013, it was clearly heard, Command 135 initiated. Instead of shutting down with the fall of communism in Russia, UVB-76 became even more active. Since the millennium, voice messages have become more and more frequent. In 2010, the bizarre broadcasts were issued on almost a monthly basis. Snippets of Swan Lake were played, a female voice counted from 1 to 9, a question mark was transmitted in Morse code, and strange telephone conversations were overheard by the receiver.
УЗБ-76, УЗБ-76, 93, 882. На имена 74 14 35 74. Девятка, тройка, восьмерка, восьмерка, двойка, Николай, Анна, Иван, Михаил, Иван, Николай, Анна, семерка, четверка, единица, четверка, тройка, пятерка, семерка, четверка.
Since October 2010, the station has changed location. The flurry of activity and voice messages preceded the most important development in the signal since it began broadcasting in the 1970s. It seems likely that the heightened activity of 2010 was related to the establishment of the signal in a new location. The new call sign was read out after the move, MDZHB. Triangulation efforts had led to the discovery of the previous transmitter for UVB-76, a Russian military base on the outskirts of Povorovo, a small town 19 miles from Moscow. After the station changed location, two groups of urban explorers and UVB-76 followers travelled to the remote Russian town in an attempt to visit the military bunker that the signal had originated from for over 30 years. When they reached the town, a local man told them about the storm of 2010. One night, a dense fog rolled in and the military outpost was evacuated within 90 minutes. After making their way across the site and avoiding the guard dogs stationed outside, the groups found the bunker and military buildings in a state of abandonment. Possessions and equipment were strewn across the base. Icy water had filled the bunker, yet clues were still to be found inside. One group described the Pavarov military bunker as a quiet and lonely dark place, something like a maze with lots of corridors and rooms. A book was found that contained a log of messages sent by UVB-76. The ethereal signal that had fascinated the world for years now had a physical presence, along with confirmation that it had been run by the Russian military. But the mystery continues to this day. Sporadic voice messages are still emitted, and thousands of listeners tune in via radios and online streams every day as they theorize and speculate on the radio signal's true purpose. The official explanation for the signal's purpose comes from an academic paper published by the Boruch Geophysical Observatory. This state-funded organization describes itself as a branch of the federal state budgetary institution of science. They explain that the signal originates from an observatory using the 4625 kHz frequency to measure changes in the ionosphere. This only adds to the conspiracy theories, as this doesn't explain the military bunker or the voice messages, nor does the paper detail how successfully the research has been. A signal on the 4625 kHz frequency would have suffered from extreme interference, rendering it nearly unusable for research in the ionosphere. The fan-favorite conspiracy is that the UVB-76 transmission is the audible version of Russia's dead man switch system. In the case of a nuclear strike that cripples Russian military command, the automated system will launch a counter-strike. It's likely that Russia does possess such a system, but is this buzzing sound really the noise of our impending nuclear apocalypse? Multiple triangulation attempts have been made to try and ascertain the new location of the signal. Unlike before, it seems that UVB-76 is now emanating from multiple transmitters across Russia. That was a scream you heard, by the way. I didn't add that to the recording. Go back and re-listen carefully if you missed it. But I'm stumped. I don't know what the true purpose is to this strange transmission, or what the voices in the background are discussing, and I definitely can't explain why you can hear someone screaming. I would like to know more about what the people found in the old military base though, and what this strange storm was. Why would a storm cause them to evacuate the base in 90 minutes? Why did they relocate the signal after that? It makes me think of Lost, some guy having to enter a code every so often or we all die, and just before that storm something went wrong. I wonder if they are conducting some type of strange experiment that is top secret. Perhaps it has something to do with time travel, or maybe it is just being used for military communication, but something tells me it has much more meaning to it than that. Welcome back, guys. So recently I was discussing some of my own experiences with some friends, and one of the experiences that I shared occurred when I was quite young, living at home with my mum and my two brothers. And one night while I was in my room on my own, I was awoken by a strange knocking sound followed by a deep heavy breath. So it sounded like this. And this strange noise kept going for some time, and I'm not going to lie to you guys, I was absolutely terrified. Anyway, reciting the story, it made me decide to see what other experiences exist out there that are associated with knocking. Now, the next story is incredibly terrifying. It comes from a Reddit user, and it's titled The Knocking Girl. When I was a boy, I, like many children do I suppose, had an incredible fear of the dark. After being tucked in at night, I would beg and plead for my mum or dad to not shut out the lights, and they always agreed. That is until the start of my second grade year. My parents decided I was a big boy and I needed to learn that the dark was nothing to be afraid of. To help with this transition, my dad bought me a very bright nightlight for my bedside table. I hated the idea of just having the nightlight on at first, but after my mother shut off the room light switch and showed me how bright the nightlight was, I warmed up to it. That first night with only that little light by my bedside is a memory that I can recall with certain clarity after all these years, for that night marked the first of many visits from the knocking girl. The glow of that little light was comforting, like a beacon of safety in the dark. It made me feel safe, and before I knew it, I had fallen asleep under its protective glow. 3 distinct knocks woke me from my slumber sometime later in the night. My eyes flew open and my head turned to look at my bedroom door, which was left slightly ajar. The only thing there that intruded was the light shining in from the lamp in the hallway. Then, once again, came 3 sharp knocks from somewhere beyond the foot of my bed. I shot up in a sitting position and stared past the foot of my bed at my closet door. Thanks to my adolescent mind, I wasn't sure exactly what to do. I just sat there staring at the dark wood of that door, only partially illuminated by the light at my bedside. Then once again, and so abruptly it made me jump, came 3 knocks. Only this time they were louder, and the time between each separate knock was greater. My breathing became heavy and my heart pounded, and just as I was about to call out for my parents, I was cut off. A soft but somehow warped little girl's voice called out from behind the closet door. "Let me come out, Joshua. I'm so lonely." I screamed. I screamed louder and harder than I ever had at the time or ever since. Both of my parents burst into my room and asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't answer. I just kept screaming. It took some time, but eventually my parents calmed me down and I was able to tell them what happened. They told me it was just a nightmare, but I wasn't having any of that. I told them I was never sleeping in my room ever again. My father, being the progressive problem solver that he was, however, fetched a screwdriver from his toolbox and began taking the closet door off its hinges. Once the door was off, my parents stayed with me until I fell asleep. The knocking girl never returned to my room after that night, but she never left me alone either. I found out the very next day a couple of rules about the knocking girl. The first one was that it didn't have to be dark for her to visit me. The second rule is that it doesn't have to be a closet. The following day that I was first visited by my knocking nightmare, I was sitting in a bathroom stall at school. It was just after gym period and the physical exercise had helped move along the morning's breakfast to my lower intestine, and I was pretty thankful when I found the bathroom empty. I was just finishing my business when I heard the echoing footsteps of someone entering the bathroom. I froze in my seat. It was clear from the slapping sound on the floor that whomever the new arrival was, they were barefoot. I waited as the footsteps drew nearer to the stall I was in, which was located at the very end of the aisle and up against the wall. I decided to call out then. "Hello?" I asked, but received no reply, only the slap, slap, slap of feet on the floor. Somehow the silence was more frightening than if anything at all would have answered me. I didn't call out anymore after that, but out of instinct I picked my feet up slowly off the floor and scooted as far back onto the toilet as I could, placing my feet on the rim of the bowl. Slap, slap, slap. The footsteps were nearly at my stool now, and I closed my eyes tightly as the sound of steps continued. Slap, slap, slap. Whoever was out there was now directly in front of my stool. I kept my eyes closed and hoped the intruder would just leave. Then a familiar sound resounded throughout the bathroom, stopped my breath in my throat. 3 hard knocks pounded against the door to my stall, followed by that same warped voice. "Joshua, there's nothing to be afraid of. I only want to make you my friend." Tears began to freely fall from my closed eyes, and I shouted, "Go away!" "Joshua," the voice replied, "don't be like that. If you don't let me in, I'll have to come in there after you." The threat made me open my eyes, and what I saw under the stall door made me scream until I sent myself into a panic attack and blacked out. Under the stall, I could see 2 bare white feet, but that's not what caused me to lose consciousness. A face stared at me from under the stall, the face of a girl with a wide glaring blue eyes and a mouth that had its bottom jaw removed, so that her tongue hung down and swung loosely from her open jaw. Her neck was unnaturally long and twisted underneath the stall door, just enough so that her head was partially in the stall with me. Those blue eyes were all that I remember before waking up in the nurse's office. Apparently the school janitor was mopping the hallway just outside the bathroom when he heard me screaming bloody murder. The school called my mum and I was questioned over and over what had happened to me in the bathroom. I really didn't know what to say, so I made up some story about falling asleep while I was on the toilet and having a nightmare. The school sent me home anyway, and my mother was furious. She didn't ground me or anything though. I think she just felt sorry for me and didn't know how to help. I told her I was fine when she asked later that day. I lied. From then on, the knocking girl came to me at any time that I was alone. If my parents were outside and I was walking past the hallway closet, I heard knocking. If I was alone in my kitchen, I could hear knocking coming from inside every single cabinet. Sometimes she would call out from wherever she was knocking, telling me that she needed a friend to keep her company. I don't know why she couldn't just open the door and come get me, but I was sure as hell glad she didn't. It didn't occur to me immediately, but eventually I wondered how she could even speak in the first place if her bottom jaw was removed. I suppose if you're being haunted by a spirit, that is a silly thing to wonder, but honestly, I sort of got used to her. Eventually she even stopped speaking altogether. She just knocked from behind whatever barrier she could for whatever reason not pass through. That made it easier. I became more relaxed. I don't mean to say I was never afraid of her. Don't get me wrong, I never wanted to see that horrible face again. But as I grew older, she sort of become a normalcy. I just lived my life by specific rules. I never went to a public bathroom anymore. My bathroom breaks were scheduled at home and when there were people in the house. I also grew accustomed to never opening a door unless someone I knew was on the other side of it. Then when I was 10 years old, the worst happened. I was staying all night at my friend Reggie's house. Yes, I had friends. Despite being known as the kid that passed out in the bathroom one year, I was popular enough. I never told anyone about the knocking girl though. That's probably why I didn't have any trouble making friends. God, I wish I would have. Reggie and I were sitting in his basement playing Nintendo on a small TV, down there where Reggie decided he was going to get us a couple of sodas. He opened the basement door and bounded up the stairs, shutting the door behind him as he did so. I continued playing until I heard a loud knock from the front door. I then heard footsteps as Reggie walked from the kitchen to his front door and opened it. I heard the muffled noises of what I took as quiet conversation, and then the front door slammed shut. All of this happened, but I was only half paying attention as I was pretty immersed in my game. I heard Reggie walk back to the kitchen, and then after a moment, I heard footsteps on the basement stairs again. Then from the bottom of the door rang out 3 hard knocks. Bang, bang, bang. I froze and my heart raced in my chest as my thoughts immediately went to the knocking girl. "Reggie?" I called out. "Yeah man, could you open the door for me? I brought down some snacks too and my hands are full." It was Reggie's voice alright, and although he sounded a bit off, I assumed it was from the strain of holding a load of junk food. "Hold on just a minute," I said, getting up off the couch and walking over to the door. Before I could reach the door, however, he knocked 3 more times with his foot. Bang, bang, bang. "Hold on," I said, "I'm coming," I said, a little irritated, but then I stopped just before my hand touched the door handle. A half-formed idea was brewing in my mind. A mystery that I had wondering about for quite some time, but I was just missing one piece of the puzzle. A piece that I would never have because it would mean endangering my own life. I hoped I was wrong then, but I thought that Reggie must have unwittingly provided the first piece when he answered the 3 knocks at the front door. I then knew how the knocking girl could speak without a bottom jaw. It was likely that I once thought belonged to her, never did. There was a sizable gap at the bottom of the basement door, and I fell down on my hands and knees to peer under it. When I did, I was met with the immediate sight of 2 piercing blue eyes. I threw myself back and scooted on my butt all the way against the far wall as the basement door began to immediately be assailed by a flurry of angry knocks. "No!" I could hear a voice from the other side of the door shriek as the pounding on the door grew louder. The voice was not quite the knocking girl's and not quite Reggie's, but an amalgamation of the 2 voices along with several others. "No, you will be mine, boy. If it takes me 100 years, you will be mine." The myriad of voices assaulted my eardrums and I had to cover my ears because the pounding and screaming became too loud. My heart began to race and I began crying loudly as I was stricken by my second panic attack, and I fainted. I woke up sometime later in Reggie's living room, surrounded by my parents as well as Reggie's crying mother, along with some policemen in uniform. The police asked me questions while my dad stood by listening to the interrogation, and my mother tried to console the woman who would never see her son again. They asked me if I remembered what the intruder looked like, and they asked me how I kept the door barred while he attempted to break it down. I didn't really know what to tell them, so I just shrugged and nodded to most of it. I was confused and scared. I didn't know how to tell them that this was no conventional intruder. Why would they believe me anyway? I later found out that Reggie's mum had left the house just before Reggie came up to get snacks for us. She needed to get some milk for the dinner she was going to prepare for us and thought that we would be fine in the 5 minutes it would take her to get back. When she got home, she found the basement door had several scratches and indentations in the wood. She found me at the bottom of the stairs unconscious and immediately called the police and the ambulance. While she was on the phone, she frantically searched the house for Reggie. Like I said, she never found him. I felt bad for Reggie, and I felt bad for his mum, but I didn't know the knocking girl would come after anyone else. How could I have? Still, I wish I would have said something, even then. If I had, maybe Reggie would have been the only disappearance I would have to mourn. That day at Reggie's house was so long ago. I'm a fully grown adult now, living in my parents' house that was left to me in their will after they too disappeared. Every door in the house is removed, of course, except for the front and back door. Tonight I'm opening my 3rd bottle of whiskey this week. It's always easier to handle the nights when I'm toasted. Tonight will be like every other night. I will sit in my easy chair facing the front door and I'll wait for the knocking girl to come. She always does. Sometimes she speaks in Mum's voice, sometimes she speaks in Reggie's voice, and sometimes she speaks in Dad's voice. Sometimes she speaks in a completely different voice that I may or may never recognize. But she always knocks, entreating an entrance into my house. I have dealt with the knocking all my life, and at 33 I have grown quite tired of the knocking. With each bottle of whiskey, however, I believe I am growing closer to answering that knock. Maybe tonight will be the night that I let the knocking girl inside to play. Thankfully, unlike this guy, I never experienced anything at the time other than hearing the breathing and the knocks. I can't begin to tell you how grateful I am that I never encountered anything as strange as this girl. After doing some quick research, it's apparent that although I haven't been able to find anything particularly interesting relating to breathing and knocking, What I did discover was generally 3 knocks apparently means that somebody in your immediate family is about to or has shortly died. However, because of my particular experience, I'm more interested in trying to discover where the breathing side of it comes from, as I only heard 2 knocks in between each breath, not 3. And the next encounter comes from fortco.com and is titled The Demon's Breath. My own encounter with unexplained breathing in the corner of my room. My interest in paranormal and all things unexplained stretches back to my youth. I don't know the genesis of it exactly, but it has been a lifelong fascination. Many people who explore the reality of ghosts and hauntings can point to a personal experience that they or some member of the family had with the phenomena, but I have not had many such experiences. In fact, I've only had one significant encounter with a phenomenon that I have not been able to explain to myself with complete satisfaction. It was rather unnerving at the time, as you'll see, and this is the first time I've written about it in this blog. The exact year, month and day have long been lost to my rather poor memory for such things, and it has now been more than 30 years since this happened, but the actual experience I remember well. The house. It was summer and I was home from college and living in my family's huge house in central New York. I am part of a large family of 12 children, so a large house was required, obviously. Built in the 1920s, I believe it was and is, my sister still lives there, a wonderful house with slide-in pocket doors, 3 staircases up to the 2nd floor, French doors in the living room, a full basement with a monstrous multi-limb furnace, and a big, full attic. It was space enough for all of us, or most of us anyway. All 12 children never lived there at the same time. The older ones were off on their own by the time the smallest ones arrived. We all loved the house, and although our collective experiences there, joyous, sad, hilarious, routine and wonderful, could fill volumes, it was not a place we could call haunted. Like all older houses, it had its creepy little corners, creaks and groans from age, and could fuel unusual fantasies. I still have dreams about a secret room in that attic that I know cannot exist. But as far as I know, no one claimed a ghostly experience there, at least not while I was growing up. That made it somewhat more difficult to account for my experience. It was June, July, August, who knows, but I was on summer vacation from college, and so I was somewhere in my early 20s. The time was probably around midnight or not long after. I had stayed up to watch TV and now had gone up to my room for bed. My younger siblings and my parents were in their rooms, asleep presumably, while a few of the older ones were probably still out and about. In any case, the house was quiet. I had the bedroom to myself, perhaps the first time I had the bedroom to myself in that once crowded house. By now, the older kids had apartments or houses of their own, providing more breathing space for those remaining. I just now realise how breathing space adds irony or symbolism to my experience. It's an average sized bedroom, probably 10 by 12 feet, with a few features that distinguish it from any other bedroom in the house. It has its own bathroom and a door to a 2nd floor porch, the latter which was rarely used because of the frail and dangerous condition of its railing. Its doors were always kept locked, but the porch could be accessed, which we occasionally did as kids, by crawling out onto it through the small bathroom window. The breathing begins. The night was warm and still. I prepared for bed, turned off the overhead light via the wall switch and slipped under the sheet and blanket. I was tired, but don't recall being unusually so. I was lying there for only a few minutes when I began to hear the sound of breathing. It seemed to be in the room somewhere. I was puzzled and could not imagine what the cause could be. We had no pets, except for a cat, perhaps, which certainly was not in my room, and the other bedrooms were of a sufficient distance away that it could not have been the breathing of another family member. Besides, as I sat up to get a better listen, I could tell that the breathing seemed to be coming from the far left corner of the room, the opposite direction of any other bedrooms, where there is the door to the porch and one of those old iron hot water radiators. Where is it coming from? Now this is very distinct, human sounding breathing, slow and deliberate. At this point, I wasn't frightened at all, but highly curious. Very often when we have unusual experiences like this, we try to find rational explanations for them. Yes, it sounded like breathing, but it must be something else. It can't be breathing after all. Breathing by what? It doesn't make sense. I sat up in bed and listened for a moment, and then the breathing continued, slow and deep. What the heck? I got up out of bed and switched on the light. The breathing continued. Searching for the source. I moved around the bedroom slowly, trying to pinpoint exactly where the sound was coming from. Since it seemed to be coming from the direction of the door, I wondered if it was something outside on the porch. I went into the bathroom and looked out the window, which gave me a good view of the outside of the door and the entire porch. Nothing there. I stepped back into the bedroom. It seemed like it was coming from the radiator. Although those old hot water radiators make clicking, knocking sounds when they were on in the winter, they never made a noise like this, and this was summer, so the radiators were not on at all. I then suspected that perhaps one of my older brothers was playing a joke on me. Maybe Paul had placed a tape recorder under the radiator and was trying to freak me out. This is not an unusual notion as you might think. At a younger age, Paul and I were always doing stuff like this. We had once wired one of those old standing telephones in the attic to a radio in the bedroom, so my sister and I could perform live radio broadcasts. And one Halloween, Paul had wired the same telephone microphone to a speaker he had placed inside a life-size pumpkin-headed dummy that was sat in a chair on the front porch. Then, when trick-or-treaters came up into the porch, the dummy would howl or scream or just say, "Hello kiddies," in a ghoulish voice, sending several of the neighbourhood kids fleeing in terror. We made a few of the parents jump as well. So Paul was not above doing such things, but we were both too old now, weren't we? Yet that is what crossed my mind, trying to figure out this mystery. Zeroing in. I stepped closer to the radiator, and the breathing grew louder. I was homing in on the source. I looked under the radiator, no tape recorder. The tape recorder could not fit between the radiator and the wall, there wasn't enough space. There wasn't even enough space for a speaker, yet the breathing sound seemed to be coming from behind it. I slowly and cautiously peered over the top of the radiator to look behind it, and as I did, the breathing stopped abruptly, as if it knew I was getting close. I was more perplexed than ever. I carefully examined all around the radiator. No electronics, no tape players, no wires, nothing. I also checked under the bed. Nothing but dust and perhaps a stray sock. Did I imagine it? Still trying to reconcile this odd experience with all that is logical, I wondered if it was possible that I could have imagined the whole thing, yet I was sure that I hadn't. The sound was so distinct and had gone on for several minutes, I didn't even seriously consider that it was any kind of ghost, poltergeist or demon. As strange as this sounds, it was too real for any of that. Back to bed then. But it had stopped, so what was the point in puzzling over it anymore? There was nothing to figure out. I switched off the light again and climbed back into bed. No sooner had I done so than the breathing began again. Now I have to admit I was truly frightened. My heart began to pound. I did not imagine it. It was not a waking dream. It was not a trick. There was something breathing in the corner of my room. I was raised in a devoutly Catholic household, so the idea of unseen entities such as angels and demons were an ingrained part of my thinking, even if I didn't at this age take them as seriously as I did when I was younger. Yet there was this breathing by some unseen entity just several feet from me. Could it be a demon? In my terrified state, the possibility seemed more likely than a ghost. So like a little kid, I pulled the sheets up over my head and prayed in a whisper, "Please God, make it stop." And in that very instant the breathing stopped. I never heard it again. Not in that room, or in any other. What was it? I don't recall how long it took me to get to sleep that night, but it's an incident that has kept me thinking ever since. I do not think it was a demon, as I might have once considered, and I can't imagine that it was a ghost. I have asked my sister, who, as I said, still lives there, if she has had any kind of activity like this in the house, and in that room in particular, and she has not. Her family have never heard anything that could be confused with breathing in that room. So what was it? poltergeist activity, a psychic projection from my subconscious, an auditory hallucination brought about by stress. I know there will be those who will insist that it really was a demon, but I just don't buy that. I don't believe in demons. They are an invented idea, and phenomena that are often attributed to demonic activity I think are better thought of in the terms of human psychology or even other paranormal mysteries such as psychic phenomena and, in rare cases, psychokinesis. I use demon in the title of this article for its sheer theatricality. The idea of it being a demon seems to me, well, silly. Why would a demon, supposedly this powerful supernatural being, one night decide to come into the bedroom of a young college student, hide behind a radiator and breathe heavily? For what purpose? Just to scare me? Again, for what purpose? To accomplish what exactly? No, I suspect that if there were demons, they would have darker, more profound and more various deeds to inflict upon humanity. Considering that the house does not have a history of haunting activity, although there may have been a few possible incidents over these many years, I have to concede that my experience very well might have been wholly psychological in nature, yet the question and paranormal-minded part of myself will always wonder. Well, he certainly was braver than me. I never got out of my bed when I heard the breathing. I think the breathing wouldn't have freaked me out as much if it wasn't accompanied by the knocking, but it is interesting that this guy theorizes that his experience may be a psychological thing rather than it being a physical thing, and I can understand why he would come to that conclusion, especially when there's no evidence of anything other than what he swears he heard. I would be very interested to hear if any of you guys have had any experiences like this or anything close to knocking, the breathing, anything at all like that. Please let me know. Head over to planetinside.co.uk and leave a comment.
I'm like, hey, what's up, hello? Sent your pretty ass soon as you came in the door. I just wanna chill, got a sack for us to roll. Married to the money, introduced her to my stove. Showed her how to whip it, now she remixing for low. She my track queen, let her hit the bando. We be counting up, watch how far them bands go. We just set a goal, talking about your Lambos. I 56 a gram, 500 grams though. Man, I swear I love her, how she work the damn pole. Hit the strip club, we be letting bands go. Everybody hating, we just call them fans though. In love with the money, I ain't never letting go. And I get high with my baby, baby. I just left the mall, I'm getting fly with my baby, yeah. And I get ride with my baby, baby. I be in the kitchen cooking pies with my baby, yeah. And I get ride with my baby. I just left the mall, I'm getting fly with my baby, yeah. And I get ride with my baby. I be in the kitchen cooking pies, I ain't never letting go.
In 2004, a man was found unconscious, naked, and covered in blood behind a Burger King dumpster in Georgia, America, without any clothes, ID, or any memories.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Kyle. You don't know who I am, and quite frankly, neither do I.
The Burger King staff found the man while leaving work and immediately called the emergency services. An ambulance arrived and took the man to the nearest hospital. Finding injured people and not being able to identify them at first is a rather common occurrence, and as the hospital already had a person they had named John Doe, so they named this man BK Doe. Later he took the name Benjamin Kyle.
I was found behind a dumpster at a Burger King in 2004. I don't know how I got there, and I don't have no memories of who I am, what my actual name is or social security number.
When he woke up, he had no memory of how he got there or what happened to him. He couldn't even remember who he was, and he was diagnosed with retrograde amnesia. The authorities were unable to identify Benjamin, and without a social security number, he was unable to find a paying job or rent any type of accommodation, and so he was passed to and from hospital to hospital.
They shifted me from, I was in every hospital and every clinic in Savannah because they kept shifting me around because everyone was trying to get rid of me.
The media then got involved and tried to help identify the man, but although appearing on multiple programs and newspapers, nobody ever came forward with any information. Doctors got involved and publicly broadcasted pictures of what Benjamin may have looked like earlier in his life, in case he had been missing for an extended period of time and family or friends might no longer recognise him. Still, nobody came forward. The FBI then decided to get involved and took the man's fingerprints. After running them through every database available, they could not find a match and therefore could not identify him either.
Since then, they have taken my fingerprints both electronically and the old ink method several times, and they cannot find my fingerprints anywhere in any database.
As far as the country was concerned, he never existed. Benjamin became the first US citizen to be listed as missing, even though his whereabouts was known, and the FBI left it at that. With no big follow-up story for the media to report, they soon lost interest and gave up the search to help him.
All the national media, they want the big story when they introduce me to my relatives and everything, but they don't. Until that happens, they're not interested in doing an article about the search. You know, it's when you think about it, it's pretty pathetic if no one's actually looking for someone that disappeared. I mean, you know, isn't there anyone important enough in your past life that they'd want to look for you?
Benjamin found himself with no name, no social security, and no help. He was completely alone. 3 years later, and his situation hadn't changed. He was completely out of options. No homeless shelter would take him in because of his lack of ID, so he was sleeping rough behind a police station. The insanity was clear. Because the government assumed he must already have a social security number, they could not issue him with a new one. Why had no one come forward to identify him? Did he seriously have no friends or family who were worried about him or was looking for him? Things got so bad for Benjamin, he said sometimes he wishes he just hadn't woken up. In a last-ditch effort, a video was uploaded on his behalf as an SOS, pleading for a chance, pleading for help.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Kyle. You don't know who I am, and quite frankly, neither do I. For the past 6 years, I've been looking for something just out of reach, but I'm not going to be able to find it by myself. I don't have a social security number, but I'm still a person. Nobody has recognized me, but I still have a past. I'm going to tell you my story because I want a future. I can't do this by myself. This is my SOS. My message in a bottle. My name is Benjamin Kyle, and this is my story.
2 weeks later, a business owner decided he was going to help Benjamin by giving him a job cleaning glasses. Soon he had legal help, and although he still wasn't given a social security number, he was given a Florida ID card with the name Benjamin Kyle, now officially his new identity. He still works that job now and has been put up in an air-conditioned shed by somebody else who saw his story. His real identity remains a mystery to this day. It certainly isn't your run-of-the-mill missing person case, that's for sure. One of the things that was really interesting about this particular case was when he was in hospital, he had cataracts removed from his eyes. And after seeing himself in the mirror for the first time since waking up, and he could see himself a lot clearer, he couldn't believe how old he looked. He didn't feel like he was as old as he appeared to be. Let's think about this logically, what could have possibly happened to this man. And let's jump straight into conspiracy theories. He was a government worker, he was involved in classified top secret information and decided that he didn't agree with it, or he went against regulations, or he did something where the government would want to get rid of him. They beat him up to the point where he loses all memory, and then they just dump him somewhere where they know that people are going to find him. Or is it possible that he was an alien abductee, that they decided they were done with him, so they erased his memory and just dumped him somewhere? But it doesn't really matter what we conclude, no matter how extreme we think that he found himself in this way. It's really strange that nobody ever came forward to identify this man. He obviously didn't have any family or friends that were worried about him or missing him or looking for him in any shape or form. I mean, there is a possibility that he didn't even originate from America. However, with his accent, I would probably say he is more than likely from an American origin. Whatever you guys decide happened to this poor guy, I really hope at some point in his life he gets the answers that he's looking for, because nobody deserves that kind of fate. I mean, that would just suck, waking up not having any memory of who you are, where you come from, and finding out that there's nobody looking for you, there's nobody missing you, there is literally nobody that really is gonna help you. I really hope that he solves his own mystery. I really do. Our final story this week takes us aboard the SS Orang Medan. In June 1947, multiple ships travelling trade routes in the Strait of Malacca off the coast of Malaysia received a terrifying SOS message that read, "All officers including captain are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead." After a short period of time, one final message was received that read simply, "I die." Nearby ships identified the source of the signal as coming from a Dutch freighter, the SS Orang Medan. The nearest merchant ship, the Silver Star, travelled as fast as they could to the source of the distress signal, but upon boarding the Orang Medan, they were horrified by what they found. Every member of the crew lay dead, their corpses scattered on the decks. The eyes of the men were still open, and expressions of sheer terror were frozen on their faces. The Silver Star's party found the deceased radio operator as well, his hands still on the Morse code sending key, and eyes wide open. But strangely, there was no signs of wounds or injuries on any of the bodies. The Silver Star's crew decided to tow the ship back to port, but before they could get underway, smoke began emanating from the decks below. The boarding party quickly returned to the ship and barely had time to escape before the SS Orang Medan exploded and swiftly sank. Some theorized that clouds of noxious natural gases bubbled up from the fissures in the seabed and engulfed the ship, and others have blamed the occurrence on the supernatural, but to this day, the exact fate of the ship's crew remains a mystery. And there are plenty of theories that potentially explain what happened to this ship. You know, some people have dedicated over 50 years of their life researching this story. What's really, really peculiar about this one is the fact that there is no actual evidence that the ship ever existed. And these people that have been doing all this research for so many years, possibly chasing literally ghosts. Some of the theories on why the ship had no official documentation referring to the name is because of their cargo. It's believed that they were involved in some sort of smuggling operation, and this could have just been explosive material, or it could have been on some of the chemicals that the Germans were experimenting with at the end of World War II. Of course, the US government would want to get their hands on that, as they were also heavily involved in experimentation with chemical nerve weapons. This particular chemical in question would be tabun, and the interesting factor about tabun is it blocks the neurotransmitter responsible for signaling the muscles to relax, hence why the crew had such a contorted appearance of their bodies, why they looked like they were in so much pain. One of the other interesting factors that definitely is worth taking into consideration is the temperature. At the time that the ship was discovered, it was a clear, sunny day, temperatures up to 36 degrees, and yet when the rescue crew boarded the ship, they recorded temperatures as low as 4 degrees in certain parts of the ship. It's possible then that the US government actually used a nondescript ship to transport this cargo, use a foreign crew to man the ship, meaning that the whole operation is completely deniable. And obviously in this case something went horribly wrong, resulting in the death of every crew member and then the loss of the ship and its cargo. Well guys, if anybody has a particularly interesting theory behind what happened to this ship, then we want to hear about it. So head over to www.planetinside.co.uk and leave your comments in the show notes. So that's all we've got time for this week, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and I hope you don't lose too much sleep. See you next time.